Levi didn't like reading. It wasn't a personal grudge. He just didn't like it. He liked dinosaurs and space and Formula One. He liked video games, Let's Plays, and funny video compilations. He liked playing basketball with his friends and riding his bike when the weather was nice. He liked everything a 10-year-old boy was expected to like, but he didn't like to read. English was his worst class at school. Science was a pain, and math bored him to tears. But English had a special way of getting under his skin. He didn't like writing papers. He couldn't spell worth a darn. And he never bothered to learn the difference between an adverb and an adjective. Papers were constantly turned in late, if not forgotten altogether. Quiz and test scores were low, and the only books he ever read were comic books, joke books, and drawing books. The last book Levi voluntarily read involved a little hidden man in red and white stripes. It made for a very poor oral report. Because of this, Levi's teacher gave him an ultimatum: read a book or flunk the class. Miss Verso, the local librarian, was more than happy to help. She was always happy to help her patrons. On most days, that meant finding any book they wanted. On occasion like today, she knew exactly what book they needed. "Here we are," she said, pulling a novel from the stacks. Carol Lewis, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Levi wasn't sure how she managed to pronounce it italicized words, but she did. A classic in a league of its own. Perfect for someone your age, or any age really. Levi let out a whine. That book's for girls. Oh, now it may have a girl as its main character. But the book is for everybody. The assurance fell flat. Even if Levi believed her, Miss Verso's words were undermined by the image of a young lady in a poofy dress on the cover. "I'm not reading that." "Well, Levi," Miss Verso said, not taking his apathy into account, "as I understand it, you don't have a choice in the matter. That note from your teacher insisted you read something appropriate for your age level, and I can think of no finer selection than this. Would you like to check out now or read a few chapters first?" "I'm not reading some girly book. I don't care about tea parties and talking bunnies." "Oh, but wouldn't that make a fantastic thesis for your book report, though? An examination of the text through a modern eye. What's irrelevant and what could be updated for modern sensibilities?" "Nothing," Levi stressed, tired of his sentiments being misunderstood. "Nothing would make me care. I don't want to read a bajillion pages about some dumb girl in a dumb blue dress. Now, first off, it's not even 100 pages, much less a bajillion. Second, Alice wore a yellow dress. The blue dress was invented for the Disney film. I know that's nitpicky, but it's important to me." "Oh, that gives me an idea for your report. You can compare and contrast the two versions of a story. I'm sure your teacher would." "I'm not reading it," Levi said with a curt tone, ready to end this discussion. "You can't make me." Miss Verso was unbothered. She knew how to handle brats. "Of course, I can't make you. But you do need to get that note signed for your teacher. And I won't sign unless you take this book home with you today. Now, what's it going to be?" Levi knew he was cornered, but he didn't have to surrender. Sure, he may have had to check out the book and take it home, but she couldn't make him read it. Miss Verso's authority ended at the metal detectors. He'd take the book home. He'd bring it back in a few days. She'd never know the difference. The library was a magical place. Not a building, not a public service. It was a place of miracles. Everything from the densest novel to the most meager pop-up book gave the library its power. Miss Verso encouraged all patrons to share in it. All Miss Verso asked was they abide by some simple rules, exhibit proper decorum, and respect the books. Those who didn't, she had methods of ensuring they'd correct their course. Miss Verso escorted Levi to the checkout desk. She scanned his card and deactivated the magnet in the book's spine. He begrudgingly accepted the book as the librarian gave him a knowing smile. "It's due back by noon in 14 days. No exceptions. And do give Alice a chance. You two have so much in common, you don't even realize." Miss Verso's methods were strict, but they were fair. She gave Levi all the chances in the world to avoid his fate. There was the encouragement, which he rejected. There were the warnings, which he dismissed, and soon after came the omens. Levi came home straight from the library and left the book on the living room table, where it was subsequently ignored. For the first few days, The book seemed to follow him around the house. When he went to the kitchen, it was there on the table. When he went to his bedroom, it was there resting on his nightstand. When he went to school, it was there hiding in his backpack. Surely, this was just his mother's less than subtle hint to start doing his book report. After all, books don't move around on their own. "Nice try, Mom," Levi would say, ignoring just how often and how swiftly the book had been moving about, even when his mother wasn't home. On the 5th day, Levi crawled out of bed and put his feet on the floor. A waxy feeling on the bottom of his feet confused him. He looked down to find an entire deck of cards sprawled across his bedroom. Levi didn't know how they got there, guessing they must have fallen off a shelf during the night. But these cards weren't just tossed on the ground like a game of 52 pickup. The cards were lined up and organized. They were in an attack formation as though they were laying siege to the bed where Levi lay. Levi shuffled his way through them, oblivious to their phalanxes, making his way to the bathroom. Later that day, he cleaned them all up and paid them no further mind. Who cared for them? They were nothing but a pack of cards. On the 8th day, while walking down the street, Levi recognized his neighbor's cat sitting in the bay window. A common fixture, the cat would usually be lying there, lazily soaking up the sunlight, occasionally staring down a bird in the tree. Today, the cat had no interest in birds. Today, the cat stared at Levi, not hungrily, but as if he had a message for the boy. He was deliberately making eye contact, turning his head to keep Levi in sight. When Levi paused to wonder what it meant, the cat's mouth turned crooked and large. A big, toothy smile beamed from the cat's face before suddenly leaping away. Even though the cat had disappeared, Levi could still see that haunting smile in the back of his mind. So often he had seen a cat without a grin. But a grin without a cat? Levi was shocked at first, but he shook it off. He dismissed it as something weird that cats could do. Cats were always doing weird things. The internet was full of videos of cats doing weird things, though he never saw his own cat smile like that. On day 10, Levi went to the fridge for a drink. He twisted open a plastic bottle and took a big swig. Alarmed to discover the familiar orange beverage he was expecting wasn't inside. Instead, it was bitter, sour, and strange. He spat it out onto the floor in disgust. "What are you doing?" his mother asked, watching him in concern. "There's something wrong with this soda," he said, trying not to gag. "I think it's rancid." "Soda doesn't go rancid," she said, ignoring her son trying to wash his tongue under the faucet. She took the bottle and examined it. A quick sniff to ensure it wasn't toxic. And then a small taste. "That tastes like tea," she said.
"What? It's tea."
There must have been a mix-up at the factory. They put the wrong label on the wrong drink. The assurance and rational explanation calmed Levi's panic, but he still didn't like it. The bottle might as well have been poison. And if you drink much from a poison bottle, it is almost certain to disagree with you sooner or later. He poured the cursed beverage down the sink and went on with his day. On day 13, Levi was playing in the backyard. On the other side of the yard, he noticed a rabbit sitting by the edge of the fence. It wasn't a normal gray or brown rabbit like the kinds he always saw hopping around in the grass. This one was stark white. The rabbit darted right across the yard, indifferent to Levi's presence, and dove under a bush. It rooted around for a few seconds before emerging again. It had something in its mouth, clenched in its tiny jaw. Levi could faintly make out the sound of buck teeth clinking against glass and metal. The rabbit had what looked to be an old wristwatch in its mouth. Without a second thought, the rabbit dashed across the yard again, disappearing into a burrow underneath the deck. When he thought it over afterwards, it occurred to Levi that he ought to have wondered at this, but at the time it all seemed quite natural, and at the time he didn't really care, so he decided to forget it ever happened. Today was Saturday, and Levi wasn't going to fritter away the precious weekend hours chasing rabbits. He wanted to play and enjoy himself. Sure, technically, he had homework. He still had to write that book report for school, but he could crank it out on the bus come Monday morning. For now, his mother was out shopping. His dad was out of town, and he had the whole house to himself.
It was time to relax.
Levi leapt onto the couch and grabbed the remote control. He flicked on the TV, the big speakers, and the video games. They all turned on just fine and ran as expected for a couple of minutes, but then they began to sputter. The sound got choppy. The images flickered, and soon the entertainment center died completely. It wasn't a power outage. The lights, the air conditioner, and the whole rest of the house was fine. There was the faintest of flickering from the entertainment system's LED panels, but overall silence. His plans dashed. Levi resigned himself to something else. There were lots of fun things he could do. He brainstormed ideas, oblivious to the book, looming menacingly on the seat of the nearby easy chair. The book had been patient. It had followed Levi around from room to room. It had been a calm presence reminding him of his obligations and promises. It had been ignored long enough. It was due back at the library tomorrow, and Levi hadn't even cracked the cover. The die was cast. Everything that was about to happen, Levi did to himself. A rumble came from Levi's stomach. "Guess I'll go have a snack while I think," he said to himself. Except that's not what he actually said. What he said was, "I suppose I'll enjoy a light repast as I reflect on matters." The voice was crisp and lilting. A finely refined voice in a posh accent, as though it had been polished at an English boarding school and dipped in freshly poured chamomile. "What the heck?" he said in alarm. "What impertinence," is what was spoken. His hands flew to his face, cupping his mouth in fright. He could control what he was saying, just not how he said it. They were his thoughts, but some foreigner's words flying forth without consent. Whatever came out, he meant what he said or he said what he meant. He wondered silently which was correct and whether they were the same thing. Nothing else was strange. He felt healthy. He wasn't dizzy. He had no head wounds or anything like that. He could move his body freely and think his thoughts without restrictions. All that was wrong was his voice. "Okay, this is weird," he tried to say. "I must say, what a frightful turn of events," he said. He didn't know what to do. Ignore it? Try and stop it? Get some help? He didn't want anyone hearing him. Then again, maybe he wasn't the only one. Maybe everyone on Earth just now had their voices swapped around. "Okay, don't panic. I'll get through this," he wanted to say. "Oh dear, I do hope circumstances will turn in my favor again," he said, his confidence beginning to falter. It was hard to gauge how time passed from then. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been hours. Levi was lost in his own thoughts. He wasn't particularly interested in going anywhere or doing anything. Not with this unignorable burden infecting his larynx. All that was left for him to do was pace the hallway. A day shall come, I suppose, when I shall look back upon today and laugh. How peculiar today was, and how silly a misfortune. He forced a laugh, trying to remain optimistic. All things come to pass, do they not? Frustrated muttering was a welcome outlet, even in such a dainty, obtrusive voice. The sound hit his ears like Chinese water torture, testing his resolve, forcing him to endure. But as miserable a noise it was, there was another sound that bothered him more. Click, click, click. The sound hit his ears.
Click, click.
The sound slowed as he tried to determine its source.
Click.
The sound stopped as Levi froze in his tracks. He knew where the sound was coming from. It was coming from his own feet. Faster than a bullet. Levi's eyes turned downwards. He had walked up and down the hardwood floors of this familiar hallway countless times, and his shoes had never made such a noise. On a normal day, if he heard such a sound, he would assume he had stepped in something. Maybe there was a rock in his treads, or a piece of gum on the bottom of his shoe. But today was not a normal day. His normal shoes were gone. Gone were his familiar white and red tennis shoes, the pair he wore every day, everywhere. With them the soft rubber soles that normally trod his home's floors. On his feet was something entirely different. Looking up at him was something completely unfamiliar and outright alien. In their place were a pair of glossy black Mary Janes, hard leather, polished to a shine so lustrous he could almost see himself staring back. Each had a delicate strap across the top, locked into place with a small golden buckle, and on the bottom, a rigid sole that would echo on any hard surface. Levi scrunched his toes and shifted his weight, hoping maybe he was seeing things. Maybe it was an illusion or a trick of the light. But there was only the truth, and the truth was he was wearing pretty little dress shoes, and they fit his feet perfectly. "Oh my goodness," he exclaimed as angrily as he currently could. "What dreadful nonsense this is. He lifted one foot, then the other to examine them. The black leather flexed and squeezed with minor give. It was quite a sturdy material designed for appearance, not comfort. All the same, the shoes were broken in and contoured to his arch and toes. They were not just some girl's shoes on his feet. They were his shoes, specifically his shoes, cradling his familiar old white socks, which made the insult all the more stinging. The first thing Levi did was retreat back to the carpeted living room. The incessant clicking was horrible, and he needed it to stop. After that, he tried to focus on not what was happening, but why. First the voice, then the shoes. What was the connection? As if on cue, Levi's eyes made contact with the book. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, sitting there innocently on the end table, propped up against the lamp. It all made sense now. He didn't know how and he didn't know why. But seeing that cursed illustration on the cover, he knew what was happening. "I am not becoming Alice," he said. "I am simply not. I refuse." This was too much. He may have been stuck speaking in this ridiculous voice, but there was no way he was going to go on wearing these shoes. Shoes come right off. He'd go to his closet, find a new pair of shoes, and wear them instead.
Click, click, click.
His shoes went as he crossed the hallway once again. He didn't mind anymore. Let them call out in vain. They would be gone in a matter of moments. He opened his closet, ready to put anything else on his feet. He should have been more critical of his desires. In his closet, his familiar sandals, sneakers, and slides were gone. In their place were 2 pairs of satin slippers, one in white and one in pink. 2 pairs of button-up boots in black and brown, and a pair of lace-up boots, easily the least objectionable, were it not for the pointed toe and 1-inch block heel. "This is preposterous," he shouted with a defiant stamp of his foot. But instead of a thunderous stomp, his current condition resulted only in a childish clack.
It didn't matter, though.
He could just go barefoot. Cold feet would be better than this. He sat down on his bedroom floor, ready to undo the teeny buckles imprisoning his feet when he saw his socks. They were growing, not larger, but higher. They were climbing his legs up over his ankles, now proceeding up his shins like a pair of milky white snakes. One was swallowing each limb. "Oh, no you don't," he tried to say in an intimidating threat. "That's quite enough," is what he said in a kittenish reprimand. The socks clung tightly to his skin, not giving an ounce of slack. No matter how he picked and pulled at them, trying to stop their ascension, his efforts were useless. They were not stopping, and they were not coming off. The soft cotton material grew thinner the higher they stretched. By the time they found their way over Levi's knees, they were smooth and silky. They were white before, but had only grown whiter since. They looked every bit as uprightly elegant as they looked absurd. As the tops disappeared under the cuffs of his shorts, Levi stood and raced to the big mirror in the hallway. Clack, 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 his feet went, announcing his speed. He gazed in the mirror, looking foolish, wearing such feminine shoes with a pair of white tights coupled with a set of gym shorts. It was bothering him that the shorts looked most out of place. He turned around, unwilling to look at his appearance any longer. He crossed his arms, clenched his jaw, and tried not to think about anything below his knees. But there, sitting propped up against the door to the linen closet, was the book. Levi ran backwards back to the living room, trying not to let the book leave his line of sight. The book couldn't move if he was watching, he reasoned based on absolutely nothing. He threw a quilt over his head as a form of protection. What he was protecting himself from, he didn't know how a quilt would help, he wasn't sure. Maybe just not having to witness what was happening would be shelter enough. He felt a soft tugging on the sleeves of his shirt. His familiar gray tee had sleeves that reached most of the way to his elbow, but now they were receding, pulled upwards by an invisible thread, stitching them into a new fit. Levi tried to ignore what he could feel on his arms, just like he was ignoring the leather shoes pinching his toes and the smooth sensation of his legs rubbing together. "I will not indulge such nonsense," he whispered to himself ineffectively. He generally gave himself very good advice, though he very seldom followed it. On the front of Levi's chest, he proudly sported the logo of his favorite baseball team. That iron-on design began fading into nothingness. Only the fabric underneath remained, shifting first in color, then in composition. The neutral heathered tone was becoming lighter, friendlier, even. His torso was turning yellow. His sides and sleeves were turning yellow. His back was turning yellow. A soft goldenrod dye was consuming the tea like a flood. Just as the gentle pastel coloring finished its work, a small vibration could be felt. The synthetic polyester blend Levi had been wearing was being massaged into something natural, something softer, something fine and smooth, a fresh cotton emanating not the familiar scent of laundry detergent, but a floral perfume. He tried and tried to ignore it, but the sheer panic of not knowing was overwhelming. Levi had to see what was happening to his sleeves. He threw the quilt off with a grand flourish, the way a magician would reveal their reappeared assistant. 2 puffs sat on his shoulders, not even halfway down his bicep. They swelled outward, gently forming domes of fabric before tapering into a tight cuff. He moved his arms, and the domes stayed just as swelled. No matter how many times he squeezed one with his hand, they didn't deflate. He had seen girls at school wearing something similar to this. It was still a shirt. It was still untucked, still loose-fitting. Everywhere except the cuffs. Maybe you could call it a t-shirt, assuming you didn't know any other names for shirts. If he had a jacket on, it wouldn't be that noticeable, and that was a small relief. But any sort of relief was dashed by the truth enveloping him faster than his clothing. The shoes had come from nowhere, and so had the tights. And now the shirt. This wasn't over, and this wasn't going to stop. And he had a pretty good idea what was next. A breeze flew through the room. It sent a chill down his spine. The elastic band of his red gym shorts was creeping up from his waist, up over his belly button, up and up, swallowing the hem of his shirt and cinching tighter. The 2 garments began to fuse, abandoning any distinction between them. "Oh, please stay the course, trousers," Levi said to his pants, pleading with them to not do what they were about to do. The red fabric rippled, just as his shirt had. The polyester threads were forcibly transmuted into the same cotton as his shirt. The drawstring kept pulling tighter as the elasticized band lost all flexibility, converting into the taut stitches of a high waistline. Soon the coloring began to bleed down his legs. The vibrant red hue was swallowed by the calming yellow. A shade unmistakably boyish, as it was modern, was supplanted by something effeminate and outright antique. Pink would have been preferable to Levi. At least people born this century wore pink. This shade of yellow was such a grandma color, the color of old paper and old teeth. "This is all terribly improper," he said in growing pessimism. The groin of his shorts began distending, feeling almost as though someone was punching him, but the fabric on his outer thighs stayed in place. It wasn't that his shorts were falling, just the seam in the center that bifurcated the material. These weren't shorts anymore. It was a dress. It had happened. Levi was stuck in a girly yellow dress with puffy sleeves and a big swishy skirt. With one final tug on Levi's backside, the stitching was complete. He was now trapped in a singular garment. He pulled at the clothing, trying to find any weakness he could exploit, but none made their presence known. This garb was tailored for him, sitting perfectly on his chest and shoulders, but also loose and caressing to his knees. With every moment, Levi felt more and more like he was falling into a bottomless pit he would never escape from. With every subsequent change, that pit got even more bottomless. After a fall such as this, he would never think anything of tumbling downstairs. He couldn't stand it anymore. He wanted to run and hide. Not that he could run and hide from his own clothes, but he didn't have to stand around and accept it. He trudged back to his bedroom, indifferent to the sound of his Mary Janes on the hardwood floor. He was going to crawl under the covers of his bed and stay there until morning. Maybe by then things would be different. A bedroom is supposed to be a place of familiarity and comfort, a sanctuary of sorts. But turning the knob of his bedroom door, he was greeted with a dreadful image. Just moments ago, he had been in his old familiar room. It was exactly as it had always been, all except for the girl's shoes in his closet. That moment seemed so long ago now. The posters of video game heroes and cartoons that normally dotted his wall were gone, as were his drawings of aliens, robots, and aliens fighting robots. There was nothing on his walls except a newly applied wallpaper, a delicate pattern in soft rose and cream. His shelf, Once a chaotic assembly of action figures, art supplies, and toys, now held a neatly arranged collection of cloth-bound volumes with gilt titles. Titles such as Hans Christian Andersen's Fairy Tales and Tales of Mother Goose. His bed was once a steel frame with green bed sheets and a fluffy blue comforter. They were all gone. In their place was a carved wooden frame with a high headboard and a feather-stuffed mattress. A folded hand-stitched quilt laid folded at the foot of the bed featuring an embroidered design of ivy and lilies. The toy chest was now a wicker hamper. His winter jacket was missing from the brass coat rack in the corner, featuring now a heavy wool cloak, but also a lace parasol and a straw hat. His writing desk featured a pen set and ink pot. It reminded him of a raven, though he wasn't exactly sure how. A wandering eye caught the inside of his closet, still open from when he left it earlier. The shoes were still arranged neatly on a rack. Up above were hanging rows of long dresses. Some in powder blue, some in pale white, some in charcoal gray, one in black, and a few in plaid patterns. All dresses. Not a pair of pants to be found at all. Levi's head ricocheted back and forth as though he were watching a tennis match. A look into the hallway, back to his room, back to the hallway, back to his room, the hallway. Framed photos of his grandparents vacationing in Hawaii. The room, a porcelain doll with a painted face. The hallway, the console panel for the home's security system. The room, a wooden rocking horse. The entire house remained untouched, save for his bedroom specifically, which was plunged backwards in time. What utter foolishness, Levi said in a huff, implying his intention to use a stronger epithet. I dare say, I suppose I should be grateful the water closet remains. One modern convenience at least. Rustle. Rustle. The sound stopped Levi cold. The clicking of his feet on the floor had made him paranoid towards new sounds. Every unfamiliar noise was like battle horns, announcing a new nightmare riding over the hills. What rustled? He softly slid his feet across the floor, positioning himself, careful not to alert or provoke anything. Had it been coming from the closet? Was one of those outfits hanging inside going to spring forth and assault him in a net of gingham and twill? Rustle, rustle, rustle? He stopped again. No, not the closet. That was too far away. This sounded close. The bed, maybe. Or the coat rack. He stepped back to the hallway, trying to distance himself from the hostility of the room. Rustle, click, rustle, click. The unfortunately familiar sound of his shoes clicking against the floor was the clue he needed. The rustles weren't coming from the room. They were coming from him. He was rustling. Levi's dress was now sticking out further than he remembered. No longer hanging like a nightgown along with gravity. It flared out in a bell-shaped silhouette, physically separated from his legs. His feet were down there somewhere, but he couldn't see them anymore. Reaching under the layers of his dress, Levi could feel layers of petticoats, an abundance of frilly underskirts, all of them adding a volumizing body to his outfit, making the hem of his dress stick out. He squeezed and they compressed underneath his grip. But when he let go, they sprung back to normal. He pushed down. They popped right back up. He couldn't even rest his arms at his side, the dress taking up all the room as a priority. He poured his way through the crisp layers of netting and lace, trying to see just how deep this mess went. Beneath the multitude of slips and underskirts, he found something else shocking. Levi wasn't fully aware how a pair of tights worked, but he assumed they went all the way up the legs to the waist, where they sat like a pair of thin leggings. But his tights didn't go up that high, or else if they did, something else was on top of them. The dress and shoes were bad enough, but now he was aware of an entire second layer of clothing, an understructure underneath them all. A pair of bloomers encased his thighs, soft and loose, tied at the ends with pale blue ribbons. He tried to chart a path with his hands to see where the cursed thing stopped, which was not an easy task considering the layers of fabric on his legs. The bloomers went higher than he thought. Up and up and up. And before long, Levi was feeling his shoulders. He couldn't see it, but now that he knew about it, he could certainly feel it. Underneath his horrible yellow dress, he was trapped in a full set of old-fashioned undergarments, a nefarious pair of bloomers, cinched at the waist, cinched at the thigh, and stopping just above the knee. Tucked into them was a chemise with the softest frill around the shoulders and neck, protecting his chest and belly from the rougher outer layers of his ensemble. Wearing a dress was bad. Wearing tights was bad, but in ways he couldn't explain. Wearing girls' underwear was a million times worse. He could be given 100 years, and he'd never be able to coherently describe the difference. Levi let out a yell of disgust, but in his current imposed tone, he sounded like a young lady who discovered a frog on her picnic blanket. That made him even more upset. It was repulsive how, whenever he moved, the clothes moved along with him. All of them, all at once, as though he were forced to carry them. All of them with their own unique and unfamiliar sensations. The slippery tights, the billowy pantaloons, the crisp petticoat, the soft dress, the stiff shoes. Clothes weren't meant to feel like this. Not to a boy. The fury, the fear, the confusion, and the overwhelming physical sensations were all coming to a crescendo. His head was starting to hurt. Pain emanated from deep in his skull and radiated out to his scalp. This wasn't like any headache he ever had before. Most of his headaches felt like an aching or pressure. This one felt more like a pull, as though something had grabbed him by his hair. And the more he thought about it, the more obvious it seemed.
Levi let out a soft gasp.
His hands flew up to catch what he knew was falling. As expected, a flow fell into his fingers, a cascade of golden threads spilling out like a blonde volcano. One hand stayed pressed against his temple out of shock, and in the unlikely possibility he could perhaps plug the rapid growth. His other hand caught the spill as it grew. His fingers grazed and grasped the strands of hair as they tumbled forth, fine and soft. The familiar dark brown color he had always known was replaced with a rich honey blonde, a brighter yellow than his yellow dress. Despite existing for mere seconds, his hair was shiny, lustrous, and groomed to a perfect sheen. It rained down his shoulders and back, straight, except for a soft wave that curled near the ends. He wriggled, trying to see what exactly was now sitting on his head. He could see parts, such as the hairs that hung over his eyes. But the true nature of his newly sprouted style was a mystery. He could certainly feel it, though. He felt the weight declaring itself with every turn and twitch of the head. He felt the unfamiliar and uninvited sensation on his neck and shoulders. If he turned too quickly, it invaded his eyes and mouth. Everything felt so off. There was just so much off with his head.
Off.
Off with his head. The sound of the garage door opening filled him with both hope and fear. "I'm home," came a voice from the kitchen. "I've got groceries in the car, Levi. Help me carry them in." His mother was home. What could Levi do? He was mortified at the thought of being seen like this. He'd die of embarrassment the moment he announced his presence with a click, click, click on the tiled kitchen floor. He'd die, or his mother would die, laughing herself to death. But he couldn't very well hide either. His mother knew he was home. He could avoid her for a little while, maybe for a few hours, but he'd have to eat dinner. He'd have to go to bed for the night. He'd have to go to school. Eventually, she would find him. And, if not her, somebody else. He couldn't get these clothes off, and there was nothing else to change into. No matter how well he hid, she would see him dressed as Alice sooner or later. Maybe this inevitability was the answer he needed. Dress or no dress, that was still his mother. Maybe she didn't know how to stop this, but she'd know something. Moms were great at helping their kids out of sticky situations, assuming she wanted to help and not take a million pictures commemorating this humiliating moment forever. "Mother," Levi announced from the staircase, hoping he hadn't prematurely revealed the announcement with his voice alone. "I have some dreadful news. Please prepare yourself for a shock." Levi took a deep breath to steel himself before stepping into the kitchen. He didn't say anything, only presenting himself by folding his hands in front of him and staring at the floor in disgrace. His mother was putting a carton of sour cream in the fridge. She saw him. She didn't give her full attention to Levi, but she saw him. She was waiting for the big revelation that was promised. "Well?" she asked. Levi didn't have a response. He didn't think he needed one. He was wearing a dress. "Honey, if nothing's the matter, I really need your help." "Mother, look, can't you? I can't explain myself, because I'm not myself. You see, that is, I am, but I am not." "Levi, the ice cream is melting." "What is it?" His mouth dropped in shock. Mother, I am dressed for a Victorian garden party. I am dripping in lace. I am ensconced in frockery. Is this not peculiar? What do you mean? He didn't know which part to correct first. His hands gestured up and down, trying to emphasize the glossy shoes, the pristine tights, the golden hair. Amid the frustration, he managed to finally spit out, "This is all wrong." His mother's puzzled expression sharply fell to one of disappointment. Not astonishment, not anger, just classic parental aggravation of their child and their actions. This is wrong or right. If I've told you once, I've told you a million times. If you're going to play in your good dress, you're going to ruin it. My good dress? Levi repeated in alarm. He couldn't decide which part was worse. That he was wearing a dress. That his mother was unsurprised by him wearing a dress. That his wardrobe had so many dresses of various distinctions. Or that he apparently had a reputation for preferring nice dresses. His mother excused herself to the adjacent laundry nook and found among the clean and folded clothing something crisp, white, and horrifying. A pinafore ironed this morning. Put it on and keep it on. I am not spending another weekend scrubbing ink and jam, and who knows what else out of that dress fabric. Mother, no. I need a doctor, an exorcist, not an apron. Arms up. I most certainly will not, he said, crossing his arms, pouting his lip, and stamping his foot in defiance. He forgot about his shoes for a moment, being sharply reminded with a resounding clack. Levi, I am counting to 3.
1.
Everything about today was horrible. But on top of it all, he wasn't going to be grounded. He petulantly did as his mom asked, lifting his arms. The ruffled pinafore was slipped over his head with the sash tied behind his back in a big bow. His own mother tightening the strings, reinforcing how trapped he was. Levi stared blankly at the wall opposite him. He was beginning to admit defeat. How much more was going to change? Have you gone completely mad? Or have I? He asked his mother. Oh, don't be so dramatic. Well then, it appears we're all mad, he muttered under his breath, still beholden to his mother's wishes he had to carry in the grocery bags. He hoped whatever he had to eat for dinner wasn't going to change, too. He didn't know what British children ate in the 19th century, but he knew it wasn't chicken tenders. Hi, Levi, his neighbor said, waving to him from the yard next door. She was tending to her garden, like she spent most sunny afternoons doing. She had her modern house and her modern yard and her modern wardrobe. Just like his mother, nothing had changed about his neighbor, only her perception, or possibly her memory. She didn't see a young boy with an adorable haircut in an anachronistic outfit. She just saw Levi. Good afternoon to you, ma'am, he said, blankly returning her greeting in his own imposed vocabulary. He was getting inured to the proper voice and elocution that came from his lips. It bothered him, of course, but being powerless to stop it, he needed to focus his scorn instead on finding a solution. What happened next was not so easy to ignore. Instead of returning his neighbor's friendly wave, Levi's hands went to the side of his body. They found the fabric of his skirt and pinched it between fingers and thumbs. The toes of his left foot found the heel of his right. His knee bent, his hands lifted the skirt, and he dropped his eyes. And just as suddenly as it all began, his legs straightened, his head lifted, and he let his skirt fall. Levi paused for a second to reflect on what just happened. Hoping against hope maybe he misinterpreted the event. His eyes grew to the size of planets when he realized. In a flurry of shame and fear, he grabbed the groceries and scurried inside before he could demean himself again. He didn't realize what was happening until it was already over. His body operated entirely on muscle memory, as if he had done it thousands of times before. He was greeted by a respected elder, and that required a response, and his subconscious memory told him the proper response was not a wave of the hand. The proper response was to curtsy. It was no longer just his voice betraying him. His entire body was starting to act against his orders. The way he dashed through the kitchen with his arms held upwards and his hands in front of him, so as not to disturb the lay of his dress. The way his run had turned from long athletic strides to short hurried steps. The way his fingers no longer gripped the staircase banister, but laid gently atop it. The way his hands knew the proper way to smooth out his skirt before sitting on the edge of his bed. The way his legs knew to cross at the ankle to preserve decency. And the way he bowed his head as he began to cry. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," he said aloud, trying to provoke a response besides grief. "A boy such as yourself to go on crying in this way. Stop this moment, I tell you." It didn't work. Not even close. He hated this bedroom and everything in it. Everything except his pet cat, which was happily nesting in the linens. Levi supposed he should begin getting used to it all. He lived here now. Maybe he could ask his parents for new furniture, new clothes, and new toys. Perhaps he could reclaim some elements of his old life, assuming he couldn't earn back the old life itself. Then again, maybe not. Today was full of surprises, things that shouldn't be and things he couldn't control. Any attempt to undo these changes would likely be reversed again by even newer changes. Whatever caused all this was surely not going to be hindered by a trip to the barber shop. "I suppose there's no use going back to yesterday," he glumly said to his cat. "I was a different person then." Even as he sat on the edge of his comically outdated bed, his eyes full of tears, his body was still moving not the way he asked it to, but the way a prim and proper little lady should. In his days, his arms welcomed his pet cat, which was now being cradled in his lap. It was a welcome comfort. Cradled in his lap. It was a welcome comfort. Levi wasn't considering whether or not his mind was now being changed. He was overwrought and needed assurance. Pets were great for that. Levi was captivated as he watched his fingers stroke his cat's fur. For the first time since his changes began, he was neither terrified nor angry. He was calm enough to appreciate how alien it all felt. Every move now was delicate, refined, feminine, smaller, controlled motions that emphasized his new role as a demure, dainty girl from another time. He was being posed. He didn't like it, but it was surreal enough to appreciate. He only wished he could appreciate it from a distance. As it was, there was hardly anything left that would indicate his actual gender or the century he lived in. Or was there? With a bolt of inspiration, Levi leapt out of bed, nearly hurling his cat across the room. After some quick apologies, he darted off with his mincing steps to his parents' bedroom. Hard evidence, documented proof. That's what he needed. His father showed him once, just in case of emergencies, and today certainly qualified. In the back of his father's closet was a fireproof safe. Inside were all the family's important documents: car licenses, insurance forms, financial information, medical records, and most importantly, birth certificates. He needed some sort of confirmation. Something that proved underneath all this, he was still himself. He looked different. He spoke different. He even behaved different. But despite all appearances, this wasn't real. A bad dream, a magic curse, a twisted fantasy, a fabrication, and nothing more. There it was, those beautiful words: certificate of birth, family name, Tenniel, birth name, Levi. If he had stopped there, maybe he would have been happy. He'd go back to his girly room and his frilly outfits and begrudge them with newfound confidence as he tried to reverse this curse. But he hadn't stopped there. He kept reading. Place of birth, Middlesex, England. Date of birth, July 4th, 1862. Levi's hands began involuntarily trembling. The paper he was holding shook on the verge of being crumpled or ripped apart. "No, no," he shouted in a petrified quiver. This couldn't be possible. But so many out-of-the-way things had happened lately that Levi had begun to think that very few things indeed were really impossible. This paper wasn't centuries old. It wasn't yellowed or brittle or written by hand. It was clearly printed from a computer and didn't seem forged or replicated in any way. It looked like an official government document. It even had an official seal. "This is insufferable," he protested. "I am not Alice. I am not a girl. I am not English. I was born in the year 2000. And he trailed off, not certain if he was being prevented from finishing the sentence, or if he genuinely couldn't remember in his hysteria. "Well, I'm certainly not English." The house around him remained unchanged. His dad's wardrobe hung in the closet above him, and there were no breeches or waistcoats present. The electric lights and ceiling fan on the bedroom ceiling were still powered. His parents' wedding photo sat framed on the wall next to the television set. But in his hands was a genuine record, evidence of a life that shouldn't exist. This was who Levi was now, a British child from a bygone era living in modern-day America. Levi felt a tingle in his face. He thought he was about to start crying again, which frankly wouldn't have been unwarranted. But the tingling wasn't localized just to his eyes. He felt it on his cheeks and his nose and his chin and even his teeth all over. And more than just a tingle, it was a stunning bolt of numbness. The same feeling he got when his legs fell asleep. Something was happening.
He didn't know what.
A cautionary examination with his hands didn't reveal anything, but he still felt those pins and needles. He knew he was going to have to look, and he knew he wasn't going to like whatever he saw. He stepped into his parents' bathroom and pessimistically approached the mirror. There was no rippling or shimmering like there was for his clothing. Instead, there was simply a series of quick adjustments. A hand he couldn't see was nudging, sculpting, and changing what it disapproved of. His rounded jawline was sharpened into something more heart-shaped. His cheeks perked up, becoming soft and supple. The bridge of his nose narrowed, and the end turned slightly upwards. His eyes, already wide in bewilderment, grew to a naturally larger size, emanating a sense of innocence. As a final touch, his irises were dyed from a deep brown to a bright blue, as though they were waiting until there was nowhere else for Levi to look before changing. There was a girl in the mirror looking back at Levi. She blinked when he blinked. She raised her hand to her cheek, just as Levi raised his. Before all of this was insulting, Levi was forced into a costume. He was a boy in a dress. He was dressed like a girl, forced to speak and behave like one, but he was a boy. But there was no denial anymore.
He was Alice now.
Not a passing resemblance, not a portrayal. That was her in the mirror. That was him in the mirror. There were only two things that would give away he was not the real Alice. The first being Alice was a fictional character, albeit one whom Levi now uncannily resembled. The second, the real Alice, was codified by a sense of curiosity and whimsy. Whatever she saw or experienced, she was fascinated by and enthusiastic to see. Levi's face had no sense of joy or laughter, only a sullen gloom. Levi walked through his house with an icy feeling of detachment. Outside the window, he could see birds on the power lines, a plane flying across the sky, a neighbor mowing their lawn. The world continued while his had unspiraled in a single afternoon. How could he escape a predicament nobody else recognized? He found his way back to the sofa in the living room. He saw his reflection in the television set, still deactivated from when this nightmare began. He was sitting with his skirt swept out from under him, so as not to crush the petticoats. He sat with his knees together, ankles crossed, and hands folded in his lap. His posture was immaculate, and not a single strand of blonde hair was out of place. And there, on the coffee table in front of him, was the book, the cursed artifact which started all this. Had he the will, he would have ripped out every page in a fit of fury and rage. But such feelings were so unladylike and untoward now. The book sat there innocently, as though it were truly unremarkable. The striking title, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, in big white letters. The glossy illustration of Alice, a woefully familiar personage circled by cavorting rabbits, hares, hatters, queens, griffins, mock turtles, and cards. Its faint blue cover faded and worn from age. Its spine gently cracked from dozens of readers sharing and loving the experiences of Alice and the Wonderland inhabitants. If they all loved her so much, how come it was Levi who had to live it? That stupid book. How did it even go? Alice found herself on a strange journey in a world of nonsense.
Right.
She met people indifferent and unhelpful to her plight.
Correct.
Her body went through physical transformations.
Yes.
Maybe not changes to her face and clothes, but she grew and shrank. That's somewhat similar. And she somehow escaped. She somehow found her way back home. Back to her normal life, didn't she? Levi didn't know. He had no idea how the story went, much less how it ended. He had no clue what happened to Alice. Was she stuck down that rabbit hole forever? Or did she find her way back? And if so, how did she get back? If Alice could save herself, he could save himself. He just had to learn how. Levi grabbed the book and voraciously opened the cover. Chapter 1. Down the Rabbit Hole. Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank and of having nothing to do. Clunk went the hatch on the library drop-off. A book slid down the chute into the collection bin. Miss Verso eyed the clock. 11:30 a.m. A little close to the cutoff, but still acceptably on time. She didn't see what book was returned or who returned it, but she had a strong feeling. She hoped he was a little bit wiser now, a little bit less dismissive, more interested in the world around him, and more receptive to ideas that once offended him, and that he would continue getting better every single day. In other words, she hoped Levi would remain curiouser and curiouser. Miss Verso resumed the menial administrative duties at the check-in desk, but the tedium was interrupted by a scraggly-looking boy, aged 15. "Hey, how's it going?" he said. "You called and said I had a book waiting." He slid his library card across the counter, hoping to be in and out in the next few seconds. Miss Verso resented people who treated the check-in desk like it was a fast food restaurant. Yes, she said after scanning the card. "Adam Barnard, how are you? I have the book you requested. I'll check you out as soon as we settle your fees." "Fees?" he asked in feigned surprise. "What fees? You have an outstanding balance. The last 9 books you've returned were over a week late. You're well over the allowable limit, but according to my notes, you needed the last 2 for a quote history project. That's life or death." She arched an eyebrow, mildly impressed with the young man's guile. "I wasn't lying. I understand. And I'm happy you lived, but you'll need to settle your fines before you make further use of our lender library program. But I don't have any money." "Then there's not much I can do, I'm afraid." His mind turned, trying to come up with an alternate solution. "What if I get one of my brothers to rent the book for me instead?" "The term is borrow, if you please, and your brothers are?" She consulted her database of library patrons conveniently sorted by surname and address. "Genesis, Eli, and Robbie Barnard," she said, looking up the accounts of his older and 2 younger brothers. "I'm afraid that won't do either. Their records are just as bad as yours." "And lost a copy of Vanity Fair. Eli has had a book about scarlet fever for 5 weeks now, and I'm afraid young Robbie returned a book in an unusable condition. We had to take it out of circulation. It appeared to have been burned." "Okay, I'm sorry about all that. I'll get a couple of bucks from my parents, and I'll pay you back next time. But I'm working on a big paper on the Transcendentalist movement, and I need the book to flesh out the essay." He stopped himself, remembering she had already fallen for the life or death excuse last time. "It's very important." Miss Verso was a soft touch. She knew better than to trust somebody so irresponsible with her precious books. But Adam was a voracious reader, as evidenced by all the checkouts. That was always a positive. He was responsible enough to do his homework and was taking charge in that sense. And he was trying to look after his brothers despite their mistakes and distractions. He was a good kid. He just needed to learn some important lessons about maturity. Him and his brothers. Perhaps a deal could be struck. She scanned the book and handed it to Adam. Alcott, May. Little Women. "It's due back by noon in 14 days, Miss Verso said with a knowing smile. "No exceptions."